Kia ora everybody, welcome back to another video. My name is Becca if you're new here. If not, then hello again. Today I thought that I would go over some other differences because we've been here for a year now and I've done a differences video in the past, but those are the big things that kind of everybody talks about when they move from the US to New Zealand. You know, it's about healthcare, it's about food, it's about little like money things. It's all those big things that kind of just get regurgitated a lot, I have found. So I thought that it would be really fun to compile a big list. I've had this list running in my phone for a while now, but I thought it would be fun to share all of the little differences that we have noticed since moving from the US to New Zealand over a year now. Excuse the voice, I'm still getting over COVID. The first big category is food differences, which I've done a whole food differences video too, but these are just other small things that we've noticed. I was just gonna list all of this, but let's just go to the grocery store and point out a few things. Don't have this at home. Definitely don't have these. We do have Manuka honey, but it's all transported from here probably. The only kind of biscuits in the States go with gravy. Wine biscuits, ginger biscuits, Tim Tams, they're Australian, but you know what? We don't have them in the States. Apparently you don't have much here either. Tasty cheese, never heard of it. Edam cheese, never heard of it. In the US, tomato sauce comes in a can and goes on pizza or spaghetti. We'd call this ketchup. Don't even know what this is or what it's used for. So one of the fun things is the fact that the eggs aren't refrigerated here. It's kind of a little bit freaky when you first move here because in the US they are always refrigerated. But it's really fun here because we can just store our eggs in the pantry. Not that I know why that's fun, but it is. Another small difference that I really love about New Zealand is the fact that the coffee is so good here. They don't have drip coffee. I don't think I've ever seen it here. But that is like the only thing that you can get in the US, really. I didn't like coffee in the US, but I really like it here. It's really delicious. And it's also a big part of the culture, and it's just very standard here to have a really good coffee experience. A lot of people brought this up when we first moved over. They would come up and ask us if we thought that the bread was less sweet here, which is true. Like, we put so much sugar in our white bread in the US. I didn't eat a terribly large amount of white bread when we lived over in the US, so it wasn't that big of a shock factor to me because, I mean, honestly, we used to always make our own bread and we still mostly make our own bread here. The bread is typically a little bit healthier here, a little less sugar. This is a really fun one that took us a while. We didn't even realize it. We had a friend point it out to us, the fact that we don't use butter knives while we're eating. So we will just take a fork and just kind of like saw through our food and then stab it and eat it, whereas here, and it's a British thing apparently is where it comes from, you are civilized and you use your butter knife to cut off a bite, and then you use your fork in your other hand, which is, it makes me feel like a child trying to eat like that because I'm using my non-dominant hand. I've never eaten with that hand, and so it's just a very fun experience. I love practicing it in front of my Kiwi friends because they all think it's hilarious. Another small difference that I absolutely love about New Zealand and even just Auckland, like it's a big city here, but walking around the neighborhood, there's so much fruit on the trees here. So just going on a little walk, we have a bunch of lime, lemon, and orange trees, and then we have like banana trees in our backyard, and you can just walk by and pick plums and peaches, and there's avocados, and people have olive trees growing in their yards. So it's like there's an abundance of beautiful fruit and food trees that just grow, and a lot of times people will have so much of it that they'll just pick it and then leave it out, or they'll give it away to friends in bulk, and it's just a beautiful thing. Whereas in the US, I've heard that town developers will actually purposely just pick like the male species so it doesn't produce as much fruit, and so because they think it's messy, and it's just not as common to when you move into your house in the US to plant fruit trees unless you're like minded like that. So this next little category is kind of a list of general small differences that we've noticed. So first, the fact that there's a woman in charge. That is something that has never been done. The closest we've gotten is Kamala Harris, who is the vice president, but we've never had a president of the US be a woman, which is shameful. But like right now there's Jacinda Ardern, whether you love her or hate her, but I think it's really cool because she's ex-Mormon just like us. The next fact that I found so cool and still like blows my mind is the fact that New Zealand doesn't have a constitution. You kind of can't get over it because in the US it is such a part of our identity that we have a constitution, we have the Bill of Rights, like that's what all of our freedoms are based on, quote unquote, and like they make it seem like if we don't have that, our whole economy and all of our morals and our whole society and system will just crumble to pieces and shambles if we don't have that really outdated old piece of paper. So it's really cool to come over to a new place and find out that there is no Constitution here. That's not how you were founded. I mean, I get that it was made from a very different way and order, like British colony, but it's really cool, and it's something I want to look more into. Next random thing is the fact that you guys have Kmart here. So we used to have Kmart in the States a very long time ago, but it went out of business like 20 years ago. So when we came over here and everybody kept talking about Kmart, it blew our little minds. Especially because when you go there, the logo is like the original like 70s ugly outdated Kmart logo. And we're like, what is this doing here? So to find it thriving and alive and everybody loves it is so strange to me. Although, I don't know how I feel about Kmart. The next funny one is that New Zealanders tend to have a lot of fun with their mailboxes. So I don't think it's quite as common here in Auckland, but I've heard that when you go out into the smaller rural areas that people will just make mailboxes out of the funniest things. For example, in our town, there's a mailbox that is made out of an old computer tower, and I just think that's so clever and funny, and it's just like a way to show that you have fun with life. A couple other differences that shouldn't be that big of a deal, but again, it just helps show that you're in a very different country, is like these sad boys, and then these guys. An adjustment that like we still haven't fully wrapped our brains around is the fact that petrol is in liters. So like this is a very terrible price for petrol right now, but we kind of have no concept of how many liters there are in a car because of course we used to do it in gallons. So it's just really hard for us to try to gauge how much it's actually going to cost us because we're used to doing it in gallons and we're used to having a very different price. So it's very much you just roll up to the gas station, the petrol station, and then fill up your tank and then pray that it's not too high of a number. It usually is. The next fun one is that the paper sizes are different here. I was about to tell you the inch size of the paper in the US, but that's not going to be very helpful here. Next is that sometimes I will go online shopping and I'll be typing in the thing that I'm looking for, but because it's such different wording and you use different words here, like it won't even pretend to know what I'm trying to find, which I find hilarious. So another one that was pointed out to us by a concerned friend is the fact that we don't use emergency brakes in the US unless you're on like a very steep hill. And the fact even that we call it emergency brakes, whereas here they're called parking brakes because you're supposed to use them every time you park, and that's the standard. It might even be the law. But yeah, we don't ever touch ours, and again, unless we're on a very steep hill. Next small difference that we really appreciate is that you guys have different hose connectors here. Again, a very small and weird difference to notice, but in the US you have to like screw it on, it usually leaks, and then it's a mess. You have a lot of wasted water, but here it's a lot simpler and easier because it connects really well, and it's like a very good system. I don't know what else to say about it. Next little thing that took a lot of time to adjust to is the fact that your dates are written differently here, so it's the day and then the month and then the year, whereas in the US we always put the month and then the day and then the year. But I mean, I do like this way better because you don't need a comma in it and it just makes more sense. But it does get really confusing, especially when it's just the date written all out in numbers, because if you're used to one way and you look at it, it can get you mixed up. So this next little category is kind of family related. First is that you have awesome organizations like Plunkett, for example, where it's all totally free. They have like free play groups they can go to, but it's also a nursing association. They just have really well funded, well, I don't know if it's well funded anymore, but they have really well developed children's groups here. And like, for example, you can put your 3-year-old into kindy or kindergarten for 20 hours for free every single week, which is really awesome. The US doesn't really provide anything like that unless you don't make enough money and you qualify for that kind of government assistance. Whereas for here, it's just standard. Another really awesome thing is the fact that women have a year-long maternity leave. They can choose to go shorter than that if they wish, but in the US, I think it's like 6 weeks. Which is terrible. That is not long enough at all. Next is the fact that there's so many different kids shows and kids books and things like that, like characters and everything. Now, there's a lot of overlap. Like, I'm sure that a lot of kids here watch a lot of American shows and everything, but it's a lot more prevalent here to watch The Wiggles, which I find really funny, and like Bluey and stuff, because those are Australian, and there's a lot more like New Zealand and Australian shows that are more prevalent. And for example, like kids books, like we have a lot of New Zealand books that I've never heard of, and so there's a bunch of different characters and stuff. So I think that that's a really fun little sweet difference. Okay, next category is kind of outdoor nature. So when we first got here, it's a really awesome thing to go on a walk, especially through the bush and everything, because all the plants and the flora and fauna are just all so different. It makes you feel like you're in a different country, and it's awesome. And kind of along with that, the other thing that makes it feel like you're in a totally different country is all the different bird sounds. Like especially the tui, it just stands out so much, and you really feel like you're in a very different place. And you can just stand there and watch rosellas fly by. Like it makes it feel so exotic and so different. So it took us a while to learn this, but we found out that all of the beachfront is public access, which I think is so cool, because I know in the US a lot of it is geared towards like capitalism and people being greedy, and so if they can own the land right in front of the water, then they're going to buy it up and make it exclusive so nobody else can be on it, and then make the people that want to be on it pay for it. And so it's just not a great feeling, whereas here everybody can enjoy it and it's free and it's beautiful and I love it. So a few little traffic things. There's a lot more roundabouts here, and a lot of people ask us if it's our first time seeing roundabouts, but in Utah, where I went to school and where Billy is from, they actually do have roundabouts there. They're just not quite as many. If I hadn't gone to Utah, like if I had just gone from Texas to here, I would have never seen a roundabout before coming here. I tend to really like them. I hate the ones that are like right before a motorway, because then they tend to get really congested and they're stressful. But other than that, I love roundabouts. They're great. Another thing that really confused us when we first moved here is the little yellow signs with the L's in it. We could not figure out what that meant or what that stood for, but finally a friend told us that it's like a learner's permit kind of thing. The other street-based thing is the fact that there are so many fun street designs here. Like I've never seen it before, where you can be going down a street and all of a sudden these like garden things extend out to turn it into a one-lane thing. A one-way road. It's so crazy. I mean, I understand it's to get people to slow down, and it is a lot more beautiful and fun, but it's just bizarre to me. And then I've also seen streets that have like parking spots made out of the curb. It's hard to describe, so I'll just insert a picture. Another little difference that I really, really appreciate and love about New Zealand is the fact that there are so many good parks here. And I'm not just talking about like playgrounds, even though those are fantastic and we utilize many of them. And it's crazy how many of them are just like around us. Like there's always a bunch, no matter where you're at. But the other really awesome park that New Zealand does really well and has a lot of is just like the big nature walking parks. So like we live in a big city, but it's really nice because we can go to Western Springs, we can go to the Domain or Cornwall Park, and it's just these massive green spaces that have really well maintained tracks and everything, and there's a lot of people that go there to walk and bike and run, and it's just a really awesome resource to have because it makes such a huge difference, especially living in a big city. Next awesome small thing is that nothing is going to eat you here. There's no wolves or alligators or bears, and it's wonderful. However, another one is that you do have sandflies here. I had never seen anything like that in America. They're a little tiny fly, like a gnat. So it can squeeze through nets and everything, and they bite, and then they have the itchiest bites that stay for like 2 weeks. I prefer mosquitoes at that point because they're awful. Next category is home. So the first little difference is that rent is paid weekly here, which was an adjustment moving here. Next, this isn't a big thing where I'm from, but I had a friend that lived down in Wellington, and she said that every morning, because she lived right off the ocean, she would have to squeegee her windows from the outside because there's so much wind and it kind of picks up all the sea mist and breeze and everything. But I just think that's so funny, and it just definitely shows that you live on an island. Another thing that does apply here is in the wintertime, our house gets so cold and damp because it's so humid outside during the winter that we do have to squeegee the inside of our windows to get the moisture off. Ugh. Next is the fact that the housing prices are so terrible in Auckland. Now, I know that everybody is kind of struggling around the whole world with housing prices, but Auckland definitely is one of the top ones. Like, our family is complaining about a $300,000 home, whereas here we're faced with $1 million home. But yeah, like I said, I know that the housing prices kind of around the whole world is just terrible right now. So next one, this might be because I'm from Texas, where everybody proudly waves their Texas flags over their homes, but it was really strange to me when I first moved here because nobody flies the New Zealand flag. I've seen a very rare few, and like I know there's one flying over the New Zealand Bridge, for example, but it's not a very common thing to just see it flying all over the place. And it's not because New Zealanders aren't patriotic or anything, it's just expressed differently here. Did I say the New Zealand bridge?
You said the New Zealand bridge, say the Harbour Bridge.
The Harbour Bridge. Next category is money. Minimum wage here is a lot higher than in the US, but it's also crazy because in the US it varies from state to state because the cost of living in all the different states is different, I guess. So like for example in Texas, I'm gonna have to fact check this, but I remember it being $7.60. Whereas here it's something more like $20, and so that's just a pretty big gap. Something I really appreciate about moving here is the fact that nobody's really obsessed with your job here. In fact, I've talked to a lot of people and they say like, yeah, I don't even kind of realize what a lot of my friends' jobs are or what they do because jobs just aren't talked about very much here. In the US, I feel like that's the first question you ask when you meet people, like, oh, what do you do for a living? Because that defines you as a person. Whereas here, it's like, oh, what do you enjoy doing? Like, what drives you? I don't know. I don't even know how to talk to people here. It's a big difference that I really love, and it's something I'm trying to work on how I converse with people. I love that because especially being a stay-at-home mom, like I feel like motherhood doesn't define all of me. Whereas in the US, you know, people ask what I do and I'm like, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom. And that's kind of where the conversation ends because that's shameful and embarrassing. No, I'm going off on a tangent. But yeah, it's just a very nice change of pace here. So they have EFTPOS here, which I'm still not even 100% sure what that even is. But we have debit in the US, but I guess they're different. Not sure. But it is cool because in New Zealand, they don't really have checks. They're completely phased out. Like, they're not a thing. Whereas in the US, they are a thing, especially for things like rent. I remember we had to get a checkbook because that was the only way that they accepted money for rent for an apartment. It's just really annoying that they still exist and some people try to use them because nobody wants to anymore. The other thing too is that they have cash here, but it's not really used very frequently, which the same is true about the US. I think the whole world is kind of just going more toward cards and PayWave and everything like that. Another teeny tiny difference is that the dollar bills here are plastic and they're not made out of paper like they are in the US. An awesome thing that we learned is that here in New Zealand, you don't have to do your own taxes. So we've never actually done them yet because we haven't been here quite long enough. But I know like in the US, you have to use a third party company or try to file them on your own. And typically what happens is if you overpay, the government gives you some of that money back, well, all of the money back that you overpaid, or if you underpay and like try to get out of it, or even if you just legitimately make a mistake, the government will come after you and tell you to pay that money, and if you try to evade it, then you get in a lot of trouble. Whereas here, I don't really know how it works here yet. The government just does it for you, and you either have to pay what you have to pay or whatever. That was well explained. The last small difference that I have on my whole list here is that you guys have cricket and rugby here. So I have polled a lot of New Zealanders and a lot of people say that they don't actually like cricket, which I find hilarious. But everybody really loves rugby. They all stand behind the All Blacks and it is a huge part of their identity here. But unfortunately, we haven't even been to a game yet. Like, we should have gone to one when we first got here, but we didn't, and then we were about to, and then lockdown happened. And so we haven't actually gotten around to getting to one yet, but we are very excited to, and we really want to as soon as possible. But anyways, yeah, those two sports aren't in the US. And so I have a lot of New Zealanders asking like, oh, what's your favorite NFL team? And I'm like, those don't equate to me. I don't know. So we really enjoy noticing the differences, and I know that a lot of Kiwis and Americans, they like to see the differences between the two places as well. So I really love making videos like these. I don't go out of my way to think up a list. It's just cute things that I notice that I just write down. But that is all that I have right now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.